Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Altispeed Technologies, the Ask Noah show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open to be a part of the program. It's a free call, 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 1-855-450-6624, or send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah Chalaya, your host. Delighted to be here with you as another episode of the Ask Noah show kicks off this hour. Has Apple given up on the Macbook as we know it? That's the question that you all have been asking the last week. I've gotten Telegram messages, I've gotten emails, I've gotten hit up in the chat room. You guys have filled out the contact forms over at asknoahshow.com. I mean, every possible way that to get in contact with the show, you guys have all been asking, for my take on this. And the truth is, we actually had this story for you last week, but we were on location live at the Tamarack Tap Room in Woodbury, Minnesota, celebrating our 1-year anniversary of the Ask Noah show. And we had a deep, interesting discussion with a lot of the people that were there about education and the future of, technology and our children. And so we didn't quite get to that story, but we're going to get to it this week. As I said just a couple of seconds ago, the phone lines are open, 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 855-450-6624. Also this week, we have the Mumble Room with us. So you can join us in the Mumble Room, mumble.jupiterbroadcasting.org. Change the port and with 4 instead of whatever it is, and you can join us that way for high fidelity audio. Also in the Mumble Room, coming up this hour is a friend of mine, Mr. Brad Mygar. And Brad and his business associate are looking at starting a small business. And so they hit me up and said, hey, we want to start a small business. We want to do a lot of this stuff on Linux, and we want to know some basic questions of how do you get started? How do you start a small business? And so they're going to be joining us this hour, and we're going to be having that discussion live on the air. But as always, phone calls go to the front of the line, and Chaz is calling from New York. Hey, Chaz, welcome to the Ask Noah show.
Hey, Noah, how's it going?
Excellent. How can we help today?
Well, it's actually kind of funny because I was going to ask you about Apple, but not about the new MacBook when I called up.
Okay.
So a lot of the discussion on the Ask Noah show is centered around owning your own technology and having the freedom to do that. And Apple's a pretty frequent target of not allowing you to own your own technology.
Right.
What I find interesting, though, is for the past couple years and even within the past week, Apple's made some very pro-freedom comments in the press. You remember that they didn't want to unlock the San Bernardino terrorists' phones,
right?
Because of the implications that could have for everybody else's phone. And just recently, they responded to criticism that they allow NRA TV to be broadcast on Apple TV on the basis that you can't have democracy without both sides. So I was kind of interested in getting your opinion on how Apple squares the fact that they really don't want you using their products to do anything besides what they've decided you should be able to do with them, with, what I would consider to be very, pro-freedom comments that are actually kind of refreshing to hear in today's day and age.
Absolutely. I think for Apple, a large part of it is a brand differentiator, right? When you have people that are criticizing Google for being overly invasive and constantly on people's backs and constantly digging through people's back pocket, it becomes a brand differentiator for Apple to stand out and say, okay, we're not going to be that company. We're going to be the opposite of that company. So if you don't care about your privacy and you don't care about, companies selling your information and all that stuff, then that's that phone and that architecture over there. And if you do care about those things, then we're the company over here. And I think that's why you see them making, the decisions they make regarding their implementation of like the smart home stuff, where it's all local on the LAN, encrypted between devices, or so they say anyway. Of course, it's not open, so we don't know, but that's what they tell us. I think that's why you see the secure enclave in the iPhone and the payment system and stuff like that. The problem is, and where I take exception to it, is for every perceived step forward that we take, we fundamentally take a step back, because in order to, let's take the payment thing, for example, in order to get this secure enclave, all this nonsense that they say is so secure, everything has to be processed through Apple stuff, through Apple's models, through Apple's procedures and stuff like that. And so on one hand, they're able to say, yes, we have audited this stuff, and so we promise you that it's secure and you can trust us because we're a big company and we tell you that it's secure. On the other hand, two bad things happen. One is we can't actually audit that stuff because it's not open source. The second thing, and arguably the more important thing from my perspective, is they nerf the chips inside of the phone. So you don't have NFC on an iPhone. You have Apple Pay, and that's all it can do. It can pay for things. Now, if you listen to Samsung, they'll have these idiotic commercials where people are slapping phones together and transferring files, as if anyone, who does that, right? Nobody taps a phone together to send a I mean, maybe there's somebody out there that does it, but the majority of us share it on social media and then other people download it, or we text it to somebody, or we send it on Telegram or whatever. That's how we move pictures and audio files or whatever between devices. We're not using NFC for that. But when it comes to things like password managers, or I was working with a friend of mine, we were installing a keyless entry thing to his house, and we were able to use the NFC inside of his phone to unlock his doors. You can hold his phone up and unlock the door. Those are the kind of things that you're never going to be able, you physically can't do with Apple, because they have nerfed the chip inside of their phone. And so that, it's weird, because you're right. In a lot of ways, the guiding mentality that Apple takes is the same as the privacy conscious free, EFF stuff. On the other hand, the way that they actually go about implementing it and the way that they force their users to subjugate to it, I think violates the very principles they're trying to instill, if that makes any sense.
No, it does. It's kind of like they want to say all the right things, but at the end of the day, they want to be the person with their finger on the button. Yeah,
right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I think Apple does a lot of things. I think Apple up to this point has done a lot of things right. I think that it should be concerning to everybody that anyone that owns their devices, that you have literally one company in charge of everything. And we're going to get to that a little bit later in the hour as we go and talk about this latest story about Apple switching up their processors. Because if you are a person that relies on a mobile laptop for production use, and you rely on a specific set of software and a specific code base or whatever, a lot of that might be changing in the future. And it may work for Apple and their business model and where they want to make money, but does it work for you? Does that matter? Does anyone care? Let me know. 855-450-NOAH. That's 855-450-6624. The email, live@asknoahshow.com. We'll get to that story in just a little bit, but I want to take some time and go to our Mumble Room. Hey, Mumble Room, welcome to the Ask Noah Show.
How's it going?
Hello.
Hey. So I want to start with Brad. Brad is a friend of mine. We've interacted, interestingly enough, this week. Obviously, I'm sure all of you are watching with great interest as Mark Zuckerberg avoids answering every possible question he can. But Brad, you and I connected on Facebook, I think, originally, and then we've more recently moved to Telegram.
Yeah.
And then now Mumble. And so I think last night or the night before, you and I were having a discussion about small business. So tell me, and obviously, don't spill any of your secret sauce, but tell me a little bit about what you're trying to get off the ground.
Yeah, so basically, I'll just bring it back a little bit. My friend and I, we have been talking for probably approaching maybe a year about starting basically an IT consulting firm with a strong emphasis on Linux and open source software. He's kind of the guy that got me into it initially, so it's kind of a cool full circle thing like that. But yeah, essentially, the more we talked about it, the more I realized it sounds exactly like what Altispeed does. And yeah, so I mean, I hooked up with you a couple days ago, and yeah, you gave me a lot of really good advice. So
yeah, so some of the things that we were talking about is, so you were confused, or not confused, I should say, but you were just wondering, like, how do I get this thing off the ground? How, like you were looking for the nuts and bolts, because a lot of people they'll call this program and they will ask for something very specific. They'll say, I'm starting a consulting firm and I want to know if certifications are valuable. Which certifications are the most valuable? They'll ask a very pointed, specific question. And you and your friend are really more after like the nuts and bolts. And so as we kind of got into that discussion, I was like, maybe we just table the rest of this discussion and have it on air. So if there's somebody else out there that's saying, you know what, I work an 8-to-5 job, or in your case, you work almost kind of in the same industry, but not exactly. And you're like, well, I could see myself making a change to doing consulting, and I could make a lot more money, and I'd have a lot more freedom, and I'd be in control of my own destiny. All those things that us as small business owners, we value. But you're wondering, how do I take those first steps? What are some practical first steps, right?
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah, I mean, I feel like we can figure out a lot of those specific things, but I kind of figured it made a lot of sense and it was prudent to get advice from wiser people who have more experience, essentially. So
sure.
So I'm talking to Noah right now.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the wiser part. I definitely have experience. So, and the thing is, too, and I've said this before on the air, I'll say it again, a lot of people, they have success and they have experience pegged as this linear mountain that you climb. And then you stand on top of this mountain of success. And the truth is, it's really more of a stinky, terrible pile of failures, and you're on top of that pile. And if you fail enough times until you figure out what doesn't work, and then eventually you find the keys to make it work. And so, and it's not a linear process. So anyone that's starting out in business, I would tell them, don't worry about a linear process, because a lot of times when you're first starting out, it feels like you're failing more often than you're succeeding, and that's perfectly normal. And the example I've used in the past is I don't know if anyone out there water skis, but I'm an avid water skier. I love water skiing in the summer. And when you go to slalom ski, one of the things that they'll tell you is when you're coming out of the water, it looks like there's water up all around you. It looks like you're 10 feet under the water. You're not. That's just kind of what it looks like. And the trick is to will yourself to hang onto the rope long enough until you can get on top of that surface tension and ride on top of the water. And that's, a lot of ways, is what small business is. And so the first thing I always tell everyone is, hang onto the rope, but at the same time, understand that small business carries a lot of risk. And, you and I were talking about that the other night. What exactly was your question about, I don't know exactly how we got onto it. We were talking about money, was it?
We were probably talking about money at some point. I think your first bit of advice was basically try to start your business debt-free.
Right.
And yeah, so I had a lot of follow-up questions on essentially how you go about doing that. I know it's a little easier in a consulting kind of focus, but yeah, I mean, if you had any further advice, like, are there other maybe solid ways to secure like early stage funding that don't entail taking on debt? Like, I had a ton of follow-up questions like that. But.
Yeah, sure. So I guess I'll just rehash a little bit of what we had discussed. So basically what I had said was debt in any circumstance, and that would be in whether you're buying a house or a car or starting a business, doesn't matter. All debt is equal to risk, because if you look at a line, you say here is zero. The further we go from zero, the more we have to catch up to get back to zero, much less get actually ahead. So anytime you're starting with debt, you're adding risk. And the particular problem that you face when you do that in small business is when let's say you borrow money on a house. There's fairly low risk involved there, because the average is that the houses tend to go up in value, and so you'll be able to sell the house for what you paid for it, if not probably more. When it comes to small business, though, it's I think it's 30% of them go under in the first 2 years, and so you have to understand that you're already starting in a risky situation, and so taking on a bunch of debt adds to that risk. And in small business, you just don't need any additional risk. Now, to your question of how do you go about securing funding to start, there's a couple ways to do that. The way I try to recommend that anyone would do it, in the way that I didn't do it, and I deeply regret doing it this way, is you get the boat close enough to the dock that you can just step into the boat. And I did the exact opposite. I just jumped into the water and was hoping that I could build myself a boat before I drowned. I quit my job 18 days before I filed the paperwork with the state to say I was going to start a business, and then we made absolutely no money the rest of that year, December of 2009, going on the next couple of months into the next year. And that was because I didn't properly plan, and if I had it to do over again, I would do it differently. So if you have a steady job and you can save some money up on the side, that's one way to do it. The other thing that you can do is you can sign agreements or contracts with various clients. So you might find a small office and they say, Brad, we really want you to come do consulting for you. You say, okay, I want to charge X amount of dollars per month to do that. And they say, okay, yeah, we'll do that. And you say, all right, well, I tell you what, you give me 12 months of the of the payments up front, and you give me 11 months of the payments up front, and I'll give you support for the entire year. So anytime you have a problem, or maybe it's a predetermined amount of hours, however you structure the thing, you set it up in such a way that they're paying you. It's a contract fee, so you sign the contract, you're doing the work, but they just write the check up at the front of it rather than writing a check every month.
Okay, so that sort of speaks to you mentioned that Altispeed has kind of a hybrid model between like a subscription-based sort of thing and an hourly. Is that sort of where that balance is struck?
Right. Yeah. So we there's two ways that you can pay us to do services. The first way, if you just call us up, you call the 100 number and say, I want X done. We will do however long it takes to do that, and we'll bill you at $75 an hour. If you want an estimate, and this is one of the things that you should know starting a consulting business, and anyone should know if you're ever calling for a quote on something. If I'm quoting something, I'm going to quote high, because I need to be able to cover myself when something eventually doesn't work the way that we thought it was going to, right? So you step into a project and you think the project's going to take you 2 hours or 3 hours, you better quote 4, because if you're not, because at the end of the day, we're definitely not going to lose money. If we're gonna fudge on one side or the other, we're going to fudge on the side of making more money. Now, I am more than happy to do what we call straight billing. So if you just say, this is the project I want done, can you do it for under this amount of money? So let's say we thought, it's going to take 2 or 3 hours, something like that. Say, listen, I don't really care. Absolutely hard limit. Do not go over $500. Can you do that? Well, we know it's not going to take $500. Nowhere close to that. It's going to take us, but an hour or two, maybe 3 tops. Okay, fine. Hard limit $500, but bill you whatever it takes, and then we'll just add our time up, and at the end of it, tell you what it's going to be. And I don't know what that number is going to be until we get done with it. I have a rough idea, but that's that. There's 2 ways to do it. And the thing about estimates are, and some people don't understand this, and maybe it's just the way that we do business as opposed to like a car dealership, for example. If we give you a hard estimate, that number is rock solid, and nothing on earth will change it. So, and we've gotten into situations. We went to do a hotel. This is very early on. And a guy says, I want you guys to do Wi-Fi. Walked around the building, found they had a bunch of access points. So the equipment was already there. Structured wiring looked fine. They didn't have a map, but we were able to trace the wires out. And I said, okay, well, take us about an hour, I figured, to reconfigure those, or 2 hours to reconfigure the access points, bring them onto our system, all that good stuff. Says, okay, all right, 2 hours. So we, wrote out an estimate. It was a firm estimate. This is what it's going to take. All right. Well, it turns out they had some water damage, and some of that equipment was not working correctly. And I never could prove that it was actually damaged equipment. I just knew something was not working. These access points are rebooting every couple of hours. And so we installed 15 new access points. We ended up replacing the router just because at that point, why not? And the switch, and they paid us for 2 hours of service. And because I gave them my word in writing that we were going to charge them X amount of dollars. And so it doesn't matter to me what things I failed to take into account when I gave them my word. We're sticking to that number. So it goes both ways.
Right. Okay. So do you ever have like customers misrepresent what the job is as you're quoting them? And you know what I'm saying? Where it's on them and not you? Like, how do you deal with a situation like that?
Yeah. So first of all, I don't deal with dishonest people, and I don't deal with liars, and I don't deal with people who steal. So if we've been in business since 2009. Yeah, I mean, we've been in business since 2009. It hasn't been an issue, I guess. So but I would absolutely flat out fire a client for that. If it was a genuine mistake, that's one thing. If I found out, especially if it was a repetitive thing, if I found out that they were intentionally trying to do stuff to game the system, because the thing is, our contract services, the way that we structure it, we don't have a limit. So if you pay us, and I don't know exactly what the monthly amount is, but if you pay us to manage a system, you can break that system every single day, every day of the year, and we will fix that system every single day, and you only ever get a bill for what the agreed upon monthly amount is. There's no limit on how much you can call us to service that system. Now, if I looked into it and found out that they're intentionally trying to cause problems, or inside of the contract, there are certain terms, like they're not allowed to reinstall the OS on their own. We have a certain amount of say in the kind of software that we're going to support and outside, because we can't be experts on everything. So there are certain limitations built into that contract. But if we found out that there are people that are intentionally trying to be dishonest, I would nail them as a client. I would just get rid of them. And the thing is, we have. You've probably heard me say this on the air. Since 2009, we've never lost a client, and I've always been very proud of that. And one of the things that, and it's come as we've expanded outside of Grand Forks into the national arena and started to compete on a national scale and doing a lot more remote stuff. I am starting to become more and more stringent on which clients I take. And so, if there's any advice I could give, if I could go back and give myself a piece of advice starting out, don't worry about keeping every client you've ever had. There is such a thing as a bad client. There are such things as customers that you really don't need to be working for. And so don't put the amount of emphasis that I put on keeping every customer, because it's, to a certain degree, for me, it was a matter of pride to be able to say that once they went to Altispeed, they never went back because we did a good job. I've started to modify my belief system on that.
Okay, that makes sense. So how do you deal with, you said you haven't had to deal with it that much, but how would you deal if a situation did go sour? How would you gracefully exit that sort of situation without burning, potentially relationships, like tangential relationships? Sure.
So I tell you how I do approach, because where I have had to deal with this kind of situation is with employees, right? If the employee has been with me for a long time, and I'll say we'll define long time as over a year or so, and something happens and I know that employee's character and that behavior is out of character, and this has happened. It's happened both ways. I've had an employee that's been with me for a very long time and they did something that was out of character. It was wrong, but it was out of character. And so I sat him down, just said, hey, what's going on? Well, this is what's happening in life and this is what's going on, and it was the wrong thing to do and I'm sorry, and here's what happened. Okay. To a certain degree, and again, it depends on how bad the thing is, but to a certain degree, I'm going to let that slide. If it's somebody that's been here for 3 weeks or a month or 3 months or whatever, I'm cutting that guy loose. And I've done both. I have kept people that have done, egregious things, but I know for a fact that it's out of character for them. I know that's not who they are. I know it's a one-time thing, that circumstance that happened, and it was the wrong thing to do. And if it ever happened again, they'd get absolutely no grace. And I've also been on the other side of it, where I've had somebody that they're just a bad apple, and I don't know if it's a one-time thing, if that's out of character, if that's just who they are, but we don't have enough invested in them to keep them around, so we just cut them loose. And so I would apply that same logic to a client. If we had a client, if the client has been good to us and it's not out of their character, and a situation came up, I would absolutely address that and say, I would, we need to make sure this never happens again, and this is why it's frustrating for us, and this is how it's ultimately, you don't want to screw your IT company, because ultimately we're in business to keep you in business, and so we would have that conversation. If it was a relatively new client, and of course money plays a certain degree in how flexible I'm willing to be, but if they don't represent a large income revenue stream for us, I'm not even going to spend the time of day. I just I tell them to take a hike.
Okay, cool. Let's see here. So I guess maybe shifting focus a little bit, how would you recommend a business starting up set themselves apart from already established competition? What are some good practical ways that you could get your foot in the door as a brand new?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So when I first started, I used to think it was all about advertising. I used to think it was all about if I had the funny ad or the creative ad, or maybe I wasn't advertising in the right places. And so we tried radio ads, we tried TV ads. For a while, we were on the big screen at a local movie theater. We had an ad that played in a movie theater.
Where can I get that movie?
Yeah, I'll give it to you, actually. I have it on my laptop. I will send it to you after we're done. I think it's even on YouTube somewhere. If anyone's interested, we can even post it, after the show or something.
Can I have a screening?
Yeah, it's pretty comical. But the thing is, and then I would sit down and I would say, man, we're spending all this make money, and it's not really turning into any leads, and I don't understand why. And what I didn't understand was that that is not how you get customers. You get customers based on who you know and how those people talk about you. And the way to get those people to talk about you is to do a really, really good job. So if you only do one thing, if somebody is out there and you're only taking one piece of information away from this show, it's customer service is everything. Treating your customers well is everything. And there's a really fantastic book, and I've read it once before. I just got done reading it a second time. It's called Thou Shalt Prosper. It's by Rabbi Daniel Lapin, and he talks about this. If you treat your customers very, very well, if you do a really good job, if you care deeply about every single customer and every single job that you're doing, they're going to thank you with these things that we call dollars, and then they're going to go and talk about you because they're so happy to be served well. They're so happy to have somebody that does really good work. People are more than happy to pay you and pay you well when you do a good job. The only time you ever hear people complaining about how much somebody charged them is when they didn't feel like they got a good value for it. And so, right. I will tell my clients flat out, if you sign a contract with us, 100% of the time, you're always going to get more work out of us than you pay for. And it has to work like that. The math has to work like that for us to be able to justify doing a contract versus just paying hourly. And so, the clients, they kind of sit back in their seat and they're like, did he just say that? Yeah, I just said that. We know that we have to, if we charge $75 an hour, we have to deliver more value for the flat price than we would get hourly, or everyone would just buy hourly. It's a simple math thing. We understand that. And so providing, we always make sure that every customer walks away with a good value, and the more money that you are willing to spend, the more value we're going to give you, because we know that is how we are going to generate more business and get more clients in.
Cool. That's awesome, man. Yeah, I think that's basically all I had for right now. I really appreciate your time, and I'm not going to take up the whole show. So
okay, no, that's fine. So
thanks so much, man.
Yeah, thank you. Before I let you go, I just want to ask. So, what general area of the country is this going to be launching in?
This will be like Ohio area.
Okay, so in a couple months or year, or whenever you get the thing off the ground, you're going to come back and tell the fine folks of Ohio where they can get some really great Linux consulting?
Heck yeah.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Great. We'd love to have you back on the show. Thanks a lot for joining us, Brian.
Thank you so much, man.
Appreciate it. Again, open phones, 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 1-855-450-6624. The email, live@AskNoahShow.com. JJ joins us from our Mumble Room. Hey, JJ, welcome to the Ask Noah Show.
How's it going, Noah?
Excellent. How can we help today?
So I sort of have a question that sort of spurned on earlier today when I was talking to a coworker of mine and we were talking about messaging, like we're still on Novell Messenger, if that's even remarkable, and I'm not even sure if you've ever transitioned any organization off of it. But but the question being, can an organization be too big for open source? Can it be too reliant on the names of? Well, from what I've explained from what my coworker explained, he said that we need to rely on the brand name of a certain company, such as Cisco or Novell, and we can't really rely on an open source product that might break and we don't have support for it.
You know what's interesting? If you would have asked me this question 5 years ago, before I started doing the Linux Action Show and then later the Ask Noah Show, I would have given you a completely different answer. I would have told you 5 or 6 years ago, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think open source can work in the small mom and pop shops. I think open source works in large industries that are specifically designed around open source or open source models. I think it can work there. But I would have told you 5 years ago that I believed there are some businesses that are so large and so ingrained in their software infrastructure and their software setup in specific choices, in specific workflows, that you can't change them. And they don't want to change, and there is no, because at the end of the day, when you're talking about business, it has to be there. Again, there has to be a financial incentive. It has to make sense financially for them to do it, because most businesses, they don't care about the principle of technology. They just want to make a buck. And so the most cost-effective way to make a buck is the best way for that business. That's what I would have told you. Now, having started working for Jupiter Broadcasting and going to a lot of these businesses, that perspective has completely changed. And the very first place to change that perspective was Red Hat. So is this company bigger than like a $3 billion company?
So basically, this is a medical campus of a university. So.
Okay, sure. So probably not a $4 billion place, or $4 billion revenue anyway.
I mean, it's pretty big. I don't know specifically about the cost of like the money and all that. I'm not a accountant from there,
sure,
so I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, so I guess my point is, when I went to Red Hat and I would walk around and I would see all of these people using LibreOffice and running Linux on the desktop. In fact, Chris and I have this thing every time we go into a business or any place really, we pay attention to how many people are running Windows, how many people are running Linux, and how many people are running Mac. And inside of our heads, we have this not calculation, but we have this tally, I guess, where we put this into this mental spreadsheet of, here are the number of companies that are telling you should be using Linux, and here are the ones that are actually using Linux. And you would be shocked at how many places that have Linux at the forefront. We'll tell you to use Linux. We'll tell you Linux is great on the desktop. We'll even make how-tos on how to do things on Linux. And then they don't actually run Linux. They're running it inside of a VM or something like that. And how frustrating that can be as content producers who actually do live and breathe what they tell you to do. The things that we tell you to do here on the air are the things that we're doing. When I tell Brad when he wants to start a business that he should be doing it on Linux, I'm running my business on Linux. And so when the next person calls in and says, how do I do a podcast? I tell them that they should be using Linux because I'm using Linux to do my podcast. I recommend people do what I'm doing, and I do what I recommend. So I'm consistent that way, which seems to be more and more an anomaly. But what I saw when I went into Red Hat is I looked for the MacBooks. I looked for the Windows computers. And I thought I would find them. In an organization that big, you'd think that, the graphic design teams and stuff like that, they probably have them. Now, I'm not saying they don't exist in Red Hat. I'm sure somebody there has a MacBook. I'm sure somebody there has a Windows 10 machine. But I couldn't find them. And I went and we toured the whole place. We walked through all of the buildings. I'm walking by every single one of those desks. I'm looking at every single one of those docks. I'm looking at every single one of those screens. And every one of them was running some form of Linux. Lots and lots of Red Hat, lots and lots of Fedora, but there's all sorts of other distros there as well. And then we got a chance to sit down and talk with the people that hire and the people that sit at Red Hat and bring these people in. And we asked them, what is the onboarding experience like? Well, every employee gets their company-issued ThinkPad, which is pre-installed with Red Hat Enterprise, and their SIT phone. And so they can take that phone and they can work inside here at the office, or they can work at their home, or they can work here or there or everywhere. If they want to reinstall a different distro, they're welcome to do that. If they want to use Fedora, they can. And there's internal support groups that help, that every, the Fedora guys, they have how to work at Red Hat in Fedora. They have all of that figured out. So if you install Fedora, there's a little inside mini group that tells you how to get that stuff set up. And they've even gone so far as to have specific tools that aren't available they're available in Linux, but they violated a group of employees' beliefs on how to use in using like Java, for example. And so Red Hat paid their engineers to go and write brand new software so those people wouldn't have to do that. Now, this is a long pat on Red Hat's back because they just do an exceptional job for it. But all that to say, Red Hat is far and away larger than most companies, and they manage to use Linux for everything. And they're not too big for it. But then the next question I get is, well, they're a Linux company, right? So obviously their workflow is going to work on Linux. It's not hard to work on Red Hat when you are Red Hat, right? What about Google? If you talk to Google employees, they get computers issued with Ubuntu. or G Linux or whatever they call it now, which it's Linux, and they are expected to do their work on Linux. And when you talk to some of these employees at Google, they have no allegiance necessarily to Linux. They could choose a MacBook, and yet they're choosing the X1 Carbons, and they're choosing Chromebooks and all these other things that are all running Linux, or their workstations that are running Linux, which are not available, as far as I know, with macOS. If you get the workstation, it comes with Linux. And those people, large company, are making everything work on top of Linux. And so I have seen Linux work in tiny little shops where resources are very, very scarce at places that rely primarily on donations and stuff like that. And I've watched them use Linux and succeed at it. I've watched places like Google make Linux and succeed. And the latest example that I've seen, as much as bad press as Facebook is getting in the news lately, and as much as I'm not a fan of Mark Zuckerberg or him dodging questions in Congress, if you look at the model that Facebook has done, again, 5 years ago, me and a lot of other people would have told you, if you want to run a proper server infrastructure, you better be buying ProLiant servers from HP or Dell PowerEdges or whatever Lenovo calls theirs, and you better buy a pre-made server, and it better come and it better have support and warranty and all that. And Facebook threw all that out the window, and they went with the open compute systems. And so they build these custom AC sides of the rack and DC sides of the rack, and they have a compute sled and a storage sled, and all of these things are all homebrew essentially systems. And then they publish a spec online, and now Google is adopting the open compute stuff. And so we are watching open source and Linux work all over the spectrum, all over the scales. And if you catch this week's Linux Unplugged, Chris actually addresses a very similar question to this, and he was talking about Linux Fest Northwest and the setup that we're going to have and how we've set that up. And one of the things that he talks about is how neat it is to watch the scale. You can do production on Linux on a $100 budget with a used, T420. We've done this T420 with a C920 Logitech webcam and a Audio-Technica USB mic connected to it. You can do a live broadcast using that setup for under $200. Or you can do what we're doing this year, which is going to be a substantially more elaborate, and there is some expense obviously involved in that kind of setup. But you're going to be able to your Linux is going to work on both of those all across that scale. And so that's a very, very, very long, half the show way of saying, no, I don't think that there is such a thing as an organization that's too big to use Linux.
Okay, that makes sense. And I guess it also depends on the perspective of the employees and or the organization itself and what sort of contracts they're also mired in as well. So that's all factors to take into consideration.
Yeah, the good news is, and this kind of goes back to our small business discussion, when you're having these conversations, be aware that usually the guy writing the check is not the guy that is largely going to be using the stuff that he signs off on. So a lot of these people that make that, they're very high level, CTO level, CEO level, president level positions. These guys, a lot of them don't even know how to check their email. They have they have their secretary, their personal assistant, whatever is checking their email and deals with all of the day-to-day issues. And so that it's I don't know, it's a good thing and it's a bad thing, but the way that it's advantageous to us as consultants is that a lot of times the pushback is when workflow changes. So if somebody is used to going into the Microsoft Office ribbon and clicking on a given button that is in a given place, and all of a sudden that button isn't there, that person is upset and thinks the new software sucks because this button isn't there. Well, the good news is, as a consultant, the people that sign off on that stuff aren't the ones that have to find those buttons or find those ribbons or get used to that workflow. So a lot of times that doesn't even enter into the discussion. There'll be a lot of people, we've dealt with it, and we do a lot of the front end support. So we deal with those calls and walk those users through it. And eventually, I have seen this. It happens almost every single time. The ship eventually does swing the other way, and then they start to get ingrained in the software that, we have taught them to use. And I was just dealing with a conversation earlier today from a client that is unhappy that Outlook is handling its sync to G Suite differently than the way that Thunderbird is handling the sync to G Suite. And she's mad, and we went to we're using Outlook over here, and it doesn't work as well as Thunderbird works. And well, yeah, I agree. I like the way that Thunderbird works too. So it goes both ways, and I've seen that happen.
Understood.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess so.
Cool. Again, open phones, 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 855-450-6624. The email, live at AskNoahShow.com, or join our Mumble room at mumble.jupiterbroadcasting.org. I want to get to this article from on Apple. Basically, we'll just read it. Apple Incorporated is planning to use its own chips in Mac computers, beginning as early as 2020, replacing processors from Intel Corp, according to people familiar with the plans. The initiative, codenamed Kalamata, is still in early development stages, but comes as part of a strategy on all Apple devices, including Macs, iPhones, and iPads, to work more similarly and seamlessly together, said the people who asked not to be identified, discussing private information. The project, which executives have approved, will likely be a multi-step transition. By using their own chips, Apple would be able to more tightly integrate the hardware and software, and potentially resulting in systems with better battery life similar to iPads, which Apple uses their own chips in. As part of a larger initiative to make Macs more like iPhones, Apple is working on a new software platform internally named Marzipan, which will release as early as this year, that will allow users to run iPhone and iPads apps on Macs. Now, this story was, it stood out to me last week, and I wasn't really sure exactly what to say on it. And then the more I thought about it, the more I realized how huge this is, and I've been following the discussions on Reddit and Facebook about it. Apple, for years, has been saying that the Microsoft Windows platform is a dead platform, and is not going anywhere. And in fact, Microsoft somehow seems to share that opinion, because they have done really nothing since Windows 7 to offer anything new and innovative in Windows. In fact, if anything, they have stripped away a lot of functionality in Windows 10. I shouldn't say anything. I guess they do have things like PowerShell, and they've taken the great parts of Linux to try to make their own operating system better. But you look at where Apple is and where they make all their money, or a lot of their money. I think the market share, I haven't looked at a graph lately. It's something like 10%, 12% or something if people are running Macs on the desktop. So the vast majority of machines are still Windows. And Apple, despite making these really high-end, premium, super expensive computers that clock down to 800 megahertz unless you put them in a pile of water, despite making those kinds of machines, still don't seem to be making a ton of traction. On the other hand, if you look at what they have done in the mobile sphere with the iPhone and the iPad, at least here in the US, they have taken off like gangbusters. Now, worldwide, I think it's still something like 90% domination of Android, and certainly all of the integrated things like digital signage and displays and commercial applications, stuff like that. A lot of those things have been and probably will continue to be Android. But for day-to-day users here inside of the US, a lot of people have chosen to go the iPhone and iPad route. And so if you're Apple and you're making just bank on these iPad and iPhones. I saw in one of our internal discussion things here at JB that Apple is there's a developer making like $2 million a day on some on I think it was Fortnite for the iPhone. I mean, $2 million a day. So the iOS infrastructure, the iPad and iPhone infrastructure it's just gone nuts. And if you're Apple and you have this, and you're making commercials that say, where you've got I don't know if any of you saw this in the Super Bowl, there's the little girls and they're playing out in the front yard and they're playing on their iPads, and the dad comes out and they're like, "What are you doing on your computer there?" And she goes, "What's a computer?" And she's, playing on her iPad. Haha, very funny. But if that's your message, that the next generation isn't going to be using computers, they're going to be using tablets, and then you couple that with, we just talked last week about a gentleman that is from a school district that was talking about how his education system is locked into the Apple infrastructure, and they are giving kids iPads. If that's the direction that you're going, does it not make sense to modify your operating system, to modify your chipset so that you have one code base to target. So when a developer comes and writes GoToMeeting, for example, on the iPad, it also works on the MacBook and on the iPhone and on whatever else iPad Pro, whatever it comes out with. Does that not make sense? So and if that's the case, what is the future of the Mac desktop? What is the future of the Mac laptop? I'd like to know. 855-450-NOAH. That's 855-450-6624, or the email live@asknoahshow.com. What is the future of Apple on laptops and desktops? It also underscores another point, and that is that we absolutely cannot get 1804 wrong. We absolutely have to get this right this time, because there is an opening, almost like an opening we have never seen before. This, between Apple discontinuing Intel processors in their laptops and the debacle that is Windows 10, that is, I go on record, that is better than any other opportunity that we've had in the past. We absolutely cannot get this wrong. And I'll be the first person to turn my microphone on, sit behind it, and say, I am absolutely sorry. I apologize if I have offered criticism or critique or feedback on, let's say a given wireless issue, and it upset or offended any of the people that whose hard work made that operating system possible. I appreciate you. I appreciate what you do. I appreciate your operating system. I'm running it right now on 6 machines, and I plan to run it for the foreseeable future. But we absolutely cannot get this wrong. We cannot have tiny little issues that affect a small group of people here or there. We need to make sure that we are addressing that stuff and being cognizant of the fact that I am willing to work through some of those issues, and I am willing to try and figure out why that happened and figure out how we can fix it. But we need to understand that the vast majority of people are not going to do that. The vast majority of people, they will give it one and one only shot, and when it doesn't work, they're going to go and buy a Windows machine, or they're going to go buy a Mac. And even if that Mac is an ARM-based processor, the reality is, as long as Apple puts sufficient pressure on its software vendors to bring all of the applications that the Apple infrastructure, knows and loves over, nobody really cares what chip is inside of the machine. But we have an opportunity right now, while Apple is busy focusing on mobile, and while Windows is focusing on whatever it is that Windows thinks they're focusing on, we have an opportunity, and that opportunity starts in, what's the date? It's the 7th today? It's the 10th today. So that opportunity starts in like 2 weeks. So we need to be ready. Again, phone lines are open, 855-450-NOAH. That's 855-450-6624. Ryan calls from Georgia. Hey, Ryan, welcome to the Ask Noah Show.
Hey, Noah. Thank you so much for taking my call.
Yes, sir. How can we help?
Well, I'm a new business owner, and I have just started an LLC, and I need to find payroll software. And I was wondering if you had any recommendations.
Yeah.
Open source would be great.
Okay. I don't know. So the thing about payroll specifically, or accounting and payroll all rolled into one?
Payroll specifically. I mean, the latter is great, but I mean, payroll specifically is.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't know if I can't even. And believe me, if it was out there, I'd be using it. But honestly, Ryan, you're not gonna. I don't think you're gonna find an open source payroll solution. The thing about payroll solutions are they are so involved with state laws and code and stuff like that, where it's constantly being updated. That payroll is really more of a service, and that's why when you go and look, you'll find that all of the payroll solutions out there is no I just buy it and I have it. You pay a subscription fee, and how shall I say, the one that you can use on Linux it'll work completely on Linux, and it also happens to be one of the most cost-effective ones is the Intuit payroll service. They have payroll for Intuit QuickBooks Online, and I don't know exactly what it is. I think it's an extra like $19 a month or something, and they will do all of the payroll stuff for you. And it is, I mean, we have used it for a little while, and it is fantastic. I mean, they literally do everything. You literally just enter the hours, you set up the employees with, what they're paying and stuff like that. They input in all of their information, and then from there, you just put in the hours, and they send out a check. In fact, they even have the ability to tie into direct deposit if you want to do it that way.
Okay, and now that's if you're using QuickBooks as your accounting software and you want to add payroll on top of it, or do they offer just a payroll a la carte?
I believe, and don't quote me on this, I believe it is available as a standalone service. And the reason I say that is because I don't think at the time that we tried the payroll service that we had a QuickBooks Online account set up. So I think it functions completely independently, and or you can have it tie into your software. Although I'll be honest with you, I have System 76 discontinued their Beansbooks product, which I really do think that was the best accounting software I have ever used. I mean, it was really, really good. And it's just not what they do, I suppose. I mean, they build computers, not accounting software. But they did a really bang-up job on it. I mean, it was really, truly fantastic. And but they discontinued it, so we had to move away from it. And so we've moved to QuickBooks Online, and it's actually been really good. It's a little bit, it's more expensive than Beansbooks, and it's not quite as straightforward and intuitive as QuickBooks was, or as Beansbooks was, but it works just fine on Linux. And then now we have it tied into the payroll stuff, and that works pretty well. Right.
Yeah, I was thinking about looking at GNU Cash.
Sure.
For accounting, but I guess from what I can see, I guess they don't have payroll built in, so I'd have to go somewhere else for that, or add something on or something. So
sure.
So I guess a service is kind of the best option. I understand what you're saying too. I mean, it's changing year after year, so I get that there's a lot of overhead for a provider, a software, a vendor to provide that. So.
Yeah, we've even seen it change monthly. I mean, there's been some things that have changed monthly. So yeah, but yeah,
okay. All right.
Yeah, appreciate the call, man. But yeah, no, it's check it out, QuickBooks Online, if you're looking for accounting software, and then check out the payroll edition if you're interested in that. Annie is calling from California. Hey, Annie, welcome to the Ask Noah Show.
I know. I always like it when you do those deep drills on a topic or a story. That's very informative. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question, though. I did a Google search to try to turn off. I switched to Lubuntu, and I can't find a way to easily turn off the touchpad. Now, I in the GUI, so I did a Google search, and I found some line commands. At one of them, X input list, which tells me which unit number the touchpad is, and then I'll put in X input set prop, and if the number's 14, I'll put in 14, and then device enable 0.
Okay.
And that'll turn it off. Problem is every time I turn on my laptop again, I have to do this thing all over again. And it's really annoying since sometimes I don't use my laptop all day, so I don't leave it on. And it's really annoying to have to open up the terminal every single time to turn off the touchpad.
Sure.
And
yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
wondering if there's a way that to keep that off. All the other operating systems, this is on Lubuntu, on Mate, and other ones, Xubuntu, I guess they're calling it. You can turn it off other ways, and it stays off. But I've never found a way to permanently turn off the touchpad. And likewise, to turn on the keypad, because I have the keypad on my laptop too, and every single time I have to push the on button instead of having it on all the time. Is there any ways you know of in the line commands, or because I couldn't find nothing, just to have it off all the time?
Sure. The easiest I guess hacky way to your question is what I would do is I would go into the cron tab. I'll give you step-by-step written directions on how to do this, but the short and dirty answer is you can go into the cron tab, and then a space tac E, and you can add the command @reboot. And then make yourself a little script. So basically, take all the commands that you're executing, and you'd save them into a text file somewhere. So let's say we put them in home/Annie, and we call it startup.sh. And then what we would do is we'd go into the terminal, and again, I'll give you step-by-step directions in the show notes. But let's say we go into the terminal and we issue the command chmod, so change the mode, chmod, space plus X, which will make the thing that then follows executable, and we'll give it our script name, so chmod plus X, startup.sh. And then we will go into our cron tab, which is the Linux built-in scheduler, cron tab tac E, and we'll put @reboot space and then the path to that script, so /home/Annie/startup.sh. And what that's going to do is every time the computer boots up, it's going to execute that script, and it will automatically set all of those things for you. Now, there might be that's the answer to the question that you're asking, is how do I automate this stuff happening? So I've answered that question, but there might be a better way to accomplish the thing that you're trying to accomplish. And if there is such a way, I will also have that in the show notes. I don't know it off the top of my head if it exists. Is that acceptable to you?
Well, one of the problems with the script thing is one of the reasons you have to push X input list is because every time it starts up, the touchpad is a different number. Sometimes it's 14, sometimes it's 30. So if you made a script to do it, you can't. I don't know how you'd make a script to read the list. You see what I'm saying?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Read the list, know which one's 14, which one's 13, and that's one thing that messed me up sometimes because I got used to it being 14, and I typed it in 14 and shut my keypad off, which is like, uh-oh.
Okay, well, I tell you what, so I'll change my answer. I've got two possible solutions for you. The first is I was just talking to the advantage of having the Ubuntu release manager on our staff here is that I can just ping him and say, how do I fix this? So he says what you can do is email lubuntu-users@lists.ubuntu.com. And I'll include that email inside of the show notes as well. And so that's thing one that you can do. The second thing I'm going to do for you, Annie, is I'm going to reach out to our a gentleman by the name of Jason Plum. And Jason is an incredibly smart guy that deals with a lot of hardware stuff. And I'll ping him. He actually helped me fix a keyboard issue once before. And so we'll see if he has any solutions for you on how we can get that solved. I'm guessing that there's a better way to do that. I just don't know what it is off the top of my head. Hey guys, are you familiar with our distro elimination challenge? Actually, before I get to that, one other thing I need to ask real quick. If anybody has experience with black magic cards on Linux, specifically 1804, 1604, let me know. Hit me up on the contact form at asknoahshow.com or send me a telegram. I want to talk to you. If you have the black magic device capture cards, PCI capture cards, I would like to ask somebody some questions about them. So let me know. It can't be on Arch. I know how to get it to work on Arch. I need some help on stock Ubuntu or KDE Neon. So if you have those, let me know. Our straw poll, our distro elimination challenge, you can vote by going to asknoahshow.com/elimination. We are nearing the end of our first round. I think next week starts the second round of our Linux elimination challenge. Last week, or the week before rather, we paired Maui Linux with NixOS. Maui Linux came out ahead with 55% of the vote. NixOS coming in second place at 45% of the vote. This week, we have, drum roll says, I have to get back to my thing, TrueOS versus Linux Mint. So I guess this is the first week of our second round. TrueOS versus Linux Mint. Again, as a refresher, you don't have to live on either one of those distros. It's if you were stuck on an island, you had two laptops in front of you, TrueOS or Linux Mint, which one of those would you choose? Again, we're going to take all of this information that we have collected, and we're going to put it into one canonical site, canonical being one central site, not Canonical the company. We're going to put it into one central site that is going to have descriptions of all of these desktop distributions, what they do, what they excel at, what they're not great at, and we're going to publish that and make that available as the Amazon reviews of Linux. That will make it easy for newcomers to come. I'm going to try and squeeze one more call in here, or one or two more calls maybe. James from Idaho. Hey, James, welcome to the Ask Noah Show.
Right now, the audio is unhearable, so I don't even know if you can hear me.
Yep, we got you.
I would like to know how Altispeed in case you can hear me, how Altispeed advertises, is a good way to put it, Linux to the people outside of the know, outside of the groups, outside of, I'll talk to people that are in network and they know what Linux is, but when you talk to somebody on the street, like a coffee shop, they're like, what? And because Microsoft and all the other companies have promoted how through advertising.
Sure. Yeah, I got you. Basically, what we do is we go through and talk about the cost effectiveness. That's really the easiest way to get a lot of those people on there. Anyway, I think that brings us just about out of time. Huge thanks to Vox Telesys for providing our phone systems, Ben, our producer, Sarah, our call screener. This hour of the Ask Noah Show may be over, but there's plenty more content for you 24/7 at AskNoahShow.com.